So the Silent Hill 4 video did better than I could have expected in a million years. Damn, those kind of numbers can give a fella an ego, huh? How about it, fella?
I'm actually okay. I know what it looks like, but sometimes people just get really busy and can't make YouTube videos for about half a year. I'm not depressed. No.
I was happy that my thoughts on Silent Hill 4's domestic horror resonated with people. Thanks, but it got me thinking, surely SH4 isn't the only game to do this, right? That question didn't sit unanswered for long, thanks to a friend recommending Fatal Frame 3: The Tormented. While I do think it's important to view games on their own merits, this will be sort of a companion piece to that other video, if only to not retread old ground. You don't have to have seen it, but if you have, just know that I think you're swell. Fatal Frame 3 practically weaponizes its atmosphere to both scare the player as well as tell one of the most emotional stories I've experienced in this genre. Which surprises me because I never bothered with the series until recently because I just wrongly assumed it was ghost schlock. But that's far from true. This is one of the most thoughtful horror games I have ever played, and I'm a Fatal Frame fan now. As always, this isn't a review, let's talk vibes. Rei Kurosawa is a young photographer grieving over the death of her fiancé, Yu Asao. They were driving in a rainstorm one night and got into an accident that took his life. Months pass, and Rei and her assistant find themselves taking photos of a decrepit and abandoned manor. After seeing Yu's ghost there, she begins having strange, recurring nightmares that culminate in finding a snowy place called the Manor of Sleep. She'll spend the next few nights descending deeper and deeper into its halls as she dreams, the horrors of the manor seeping its way into her real life, signified by a painful tattoo carving itself into her skin the further she descends. I praised SH4 for making Henry's home feel like a livable and cozy location, even if, to some, it's just a run-down cheap apartment. Rei's house, though? Meticulously detailed, rendered unbelievably high quality for the PS2. It feels like a home away from home. 2005 was relatively far into the PlayStation 2's lifespan, and Tecmo pulled out all the stops in making Rei's home feel lived in physically, yet not emotionally. Not to be an upscaler nerd, but any developer bothering to make their PS2 game 480p in a sea of 480i's is not to be trifled with. This game's environments are a sight to behold. The footage in this video is being played on actual hardware, which might not look as nice as up-resing the whole thing, but I absolutely adore how this game looks being played on an actual PS2. From the models to the textures, everything is presented rich and pristine. As you navigate through this living hell, you'll split your time between Rei's house and the Manor of Sleep. In the opening hours, Rei considers her house a safe space. So much so, she practically retreated from the outside world after Yu passed away. She clings to this lonely house, but it's obvious that without Yu here, it's not the same anymore. She relies on it for whatever emotional support it can give her, but you can tell that she feels disconnected. The air is uncomfortable, but she can't get herself to leave for several reasons, one of which being a rainstorm that persists through the events of the game, never letting up. This is Fatal Frame 3's tone. Wet. Okay, fine. Somber, dreary. Her inner monologue says it best.
A light drizzle has been falling for several days. There's something comforting about the sound of the rain, the way it seems to envelop the whole house and everything in it.
I love this line. I'd drink it if I could. The rain is a constant source of white noise while in her house, never leaving you or her alone with your thoughts. Remember those rainy Sundays where you wake up just a little too late to actually do anything? So you leave the lights off or dim and mope around, serenaded by the storm. Those droning raindrops pelting your window at an inconsistent rhythm, lulling you into a sense of unproductive comfort. You give yourself a day to just lay on the couch in the dark. Let the world pass you by. Ray's house nails this feeling so much better than any other video game I have ever played. I'd often find myself just standing around, taking in the atmosphere and loitering far more than I should have. The dimly lit hallways felt like a blanket just taken out of the dryer, but one that loses its heat fast in the winter cold. As Ray's nightmares worsen night by night, it becomes fitting that both you and her might hesitate to fall asleep, especially if you've made this place your anchor. Those feelings only amplify the deeper you delve into the manor, ramping up her insomnia until there's nowhere to run. The nightmare starts slow, a cutscene taking place at night where Ray imagines a ghost, then a stain appearing on her walls, growing more day by day. A presence that doesn't belong, unwelcome eyes watching your every move.
Yes, Kurosawa speaking. I should have died.
Accompanying this is the soundtrack. I respect how willing this game is to leave you uncomfortable and immersed, so much so that it sacrifices traditional horror game OST bops for something moody and atmospheric. When music plays, it exists to enhance that quiet droning in your ears, reminding you that you're never really alone. The theme in Ray's home probably won't stick with me forever, but that's because it feels like it's part of the storm looming outside. I associate this song with the rain so much that after a while, I didn't really hear a song. I love when composers show restraint to just focus on crafting an unnerving atmosphere where song and sound are inseparable. It allows each track to blend into the next, linger in the background, and in this case, make Ray's descent into the manor feel as if she's being stalked by a ghostly choir. Speaking of Ray, she's an absolutely fascinating character. If you're not sympathetic to grieving widows, you might just think she's boring. Which, I won't lie, a bit of a self-report. You should go find a partner to love and cherish. Okay, I only realized this reading the script, but that absolutely sounds like a threat. You should go love and cherish someone so they can die. Personally, I love reserved characters and character studies of sad people. I love all the ways in which you can interpret what it means to grieve, how different people process horrible things happening to them. So I ate up every inch of her subtle characterization. She never says much throughout the game, but reading item descriptions in her house paints the picture of a woman struggling to let go.
There are several handmade scented candles on top of the desk. Miku made them. She probably made them specially with me in mind, but for that reason I can't bring myself to light them, and so they just sit here, unlit and unused. On the desk are a sketchbook and an appointment book Miku made for me to keep track of all my work assignments. Squeezed into the corner of the page is a handwritten warning. Don't work too hard. Maybe I have been working too hard since that day, but that's the way I prefer it right now. In the corner is an ornamental potted plant. Looking after it is Miku's job. Come to think of it, Miku looks after just about everything in the house these days. Miku's low-heeled shoes are under the shoe rack. If we cleared away used shoes, there would be plenty of room for all of Miku's. The front door is kept locked. Since that day, I don't leave the house unless I have to for work.
In the hands of an incompetent writer, these lines could have come off as condescending, that we're supposed to get the idea that Rei is pathetic. Fortunately, I don't think that's the case here. The writing might be thorough in exploring the misery of Rei's situation, but it overall leans sympathetic. These are very common sentiments and experiences for those in a wide range of depressive episodes, and even if they are slight, they make the intended audience relate heavily with her. There are also less subtle ways this is shown. Yu's room has been left exactly as it was. You get the sense that she's trying to preserve it so his memory is kept alive, but it hurts her so much that she can't even make herself go inside often. Every time she has to consult old notes of his, it weighs down on her. Much of the storytelling happens through notes or old recordings she finds, telling the tales of past victims and their struggle to maintain their sanity in the manner of sleep. Rei feels seen by this, and even contemplates if surrendering to its pull would be for the best. She realizes that the nightmarish situation is a grave threat, but that grief hangs over her head, keeping her from asking for help. She doesn't want to reach out to others, either to not bother them or not to make more relationships fated to end. She feels isolated even though she shares screen time with 2 other leads. It's a neat detail, portraying depression so well. Even when you're with others, you never truly feel present in a group. She's distant with her live-in assistant, Fatal Frame 1's Miku Hinasaki. Miku has to work through her own trauma, leading to a fascinating dynamic where both women clearly need support from one another, but awkwardly share their space, not being able to open up. Kei, the other protagonist and Yu's best friend, spent quite some time trying to send letters to him after his passing, which Rei lets stack up, unable to bring herself to write back. That's another little bit of storytelling I adore in this game. Kei doesn't even know his best friend is dead because Rei can't bring herself to talk about it, blaming herself for his death and worried Kei would lash out at her. I've noticed it's become a bit common for audiences to not like stories where the entire cast won't talk to one another, and I get the frustration, but here it feels human. It's hard to open up to others in general, and as adults, it can feel like we're conditioned to bottle things up. So, after both of them spend every single night for well over a week in the manor's halls, when they finally do get a chance to meet, they're too desensitized and exhausted from the horrors of their situation that they struggle to hold a proper conversation. Operating as the capstone to a trilogy, Fatal Frame 3 is about a lot of things. The one core theme that ties everything together, though, is survivor's guilt. Why did they die and leave me all alone? Why did I get to live instead of them? Fatal Frame 3's approach to horror might look similar to SH4's at a glance, but poke around it for just a few hours and you'll find it to be entirely its own thing. Yes, ghosts are the in-game reasoning behind the events of both games, but the way they're fatally framed couldn't be more different. In Silent Hill 4, the ghosts haunting you are the victims of Mr. Circumcision. Their lingering resentment is what causes them to be hostile, almost by happenstance, something that Walter's all too happy to use against you. Ghosts in Fatal Frame 3, on the other hand, are distant and detached, but your lingering regret draws you to them. The threat comes from a century of trauma, rooted in something universal. Reika Kuze, the tattooed priestess, is the central figure pulling all these souls and trapping them in the manner of sleep. But she doesn't command them. There's no elaborate, complicated mastermind here. You get the sense that these ghosts are stuck there, miserably lashing out at anyone left alive, and, like Rei, unable to move on. The Fatal Frame series has a consistent adoration for presenting real-life spaces decades after their heyday, preserved haphazardly in ruined detail and a thick coat of dust. With each game, you feel like you're stumbling into a decrepit haunted house. You're an outsider in an unwelcome place. Misery hangs in the air, overbearing and dense. It's hard to describe what these games really make me feel. I wouldn't really call it horror, but it's something almost worse than that. The atmosphere is so poignant, so oppressing, it's like it's weighing down on my soul. As if you're always being stalked by a presence that you can't begin to comprehend. Once again, I must say that this is the developers at Tecmo flexing their mastery of the PS2 hardware. For a system that was pretty underpowered for the generation it was in, they make the PS2 sing. Everything here is spot on and dingy, gross, in all the best ways. There's an art in aiming for realism on hardware of this era, and I feel like this doesn't get enough love for all the efforts the team took in making something look so natural. And I'm gonna say it, I think it's still the best looking game in the series. What I find fascinating about the Manor of Sleep is how malleable it is. As the other two protagonists join Rei here, it begins to morph and change based on their traumas. Miku brings in aspects of the Himuro mansion from 1. She was the only one to survive that game, and the death of her brother, Maifuyu, weighs down on her with each day. The other lead, Kei Amakura, has an interesting relationship with the manor. He's really only there to save his niece, Mio, who got trapped there and is in a deep sleep. Mio was the protagonist of the second game, bringing with her elements of the manors in All Gods Village to the Manor of Sleep. A cynic might find this to be asset reuse, but I'd say it's just a smart way to reincorporate those old assets. It plays with fan expectations, and makes our characters relive events that brought them to the Manor of Sleep to begin with. Sure, we might look like we all have our shit together in our day-to-day lives, but that composure comes crumbling down in our dreams, and there's nothing worse than being trapped in a nightmare based on your past. And if you'd like to extrapolate more meaning from this, you could argue that this shows how we carry our trauma with us, and how that trauma can overflow into the lives of others. I guess that I should probably talk about the photography in the Ghost photography game, but all I really have to say is that I think it's kinda neat that they specifically chose to make Rei a photojournalist, if only because it ties our protagonist to the main way of interacting with the game itself. She has her own darkroom, allowing her to develop film taken inside of the Manor of Sleep. But you also start to get the impression that this passion for photography died with you. In the real world, it has become nothing more than an obligation, just another way to pay the bills. And in the manor, this is the only thing keeping her alive, with any passion for the art of photography probably all gone.
Pieces of my work are pinned up on the wall. There are more scenery shots now than there used to be. I don't feel ready yet for projects that involve taking pictures of people. A few fashion magazines lie tossed aside. I used to do this kind of work as well, and used to like reading the magazines too, but it's not the kind of thing I can enjoy anymore. On the shelf is a camera I never use anymore. I used to enjoy using this camera, back in the days when I used to take pictures for fun.
I heard you cry out. Oh, I was worried. You've been having so many nightmares lately.
I appreciate that they intentionally did not take the dream premise too far. Dream logic in horror can be a compelling way to create grotesque scenarios for our protagonists to survive, but in Fatal Frame 3, outside of some ghosts, there's nothing outwardly fantastical or wacky like you'd find in some deranged nightmare. This subdued vibe for this ongoing dream makes the Manor of Sleep feel much more sinister. Think back to those rainy days and how easy it was to just sit there and let the lethargy consume you. The Manor of Sleep is the kind of place that beckons you to close your weary eyes and drift off with the currents into the deep sea. The way this game presents grief as something slowly tearing you up inside, haunting you night and day, spreading from one host to another, feels so accurate. It's a very raw emotion, one that I don't see turned into horror threats often enough. The people drawn in here are trapped, all alone, while their grief eats at them, corrupting once comforting places. Rei feels that about you, Miku feels that about Mafuyu, and while Kei is the weakest link in the cast, I still like the role he fills as someone trying to be an anchor to a victim. But one way or another, everyone who gets pulled into the manner of sleep does so because of grief. She can't stop, though, stuck between being too far in and knowing that she might see you again if she keeps going through it. It's tragic and mirrors the antagonist, Reika. The tattoo Rei slowly develops as part of Reika's curse, physically manifesting her grief for all to see, until it becomes too much to bear. Reika's duties as a priestess cost her years of suffering and the loss of the one she loved most, and it ultimately consumed her identity. Maybe Reika sees Rei in herself, and vice versa. Okay, so this next part has been difficult for me to write. I took a lot of care in how I should best represent this, so this might be heavy for some, so I ask you again to heed the content warning shown at the beginning if this kind of stuff makes you uncomfortable. A few years ago, a close childhood friend of mine took their own life. We had drifted apart over the years, but as you might expect, something like that happening completely changed my life forever. I don't want anyone who's gone through so much worse than me to feel like I'm trying to make this about myself, but it always bothered me. I've spent years regretting that I didn't check in more often, thinking, could I have done something if I only kept up with them more? Different variations of that question have gnawed at me for a long time, always unanswerable. I never blamed them, though. Depression has been an unwelcome companion for much of my adult life, but in my darkest moments, one of the things that has kept me going is the thought that if I were to leave this world, people might miss me, but what about them? I'm one of the lucky few who gets to keep their memory alive. I say all this because there's a moment in this game's ending that I don't think an explanation could do justice. When Rei frees the soul of the Manor's maiden, she sees you begin to cross over to the other side, and she begs him to take her with. And what he says in response will probably stay with me forever.
When you die, then I'll be gone forever. As long as you go on living, a part of me will continue to live on. That's why I need you to live.
And she does exactly that. In both endings of the game, Rei lives. Her survival is the linchpin of Fatal Frame 3. I think that's beautiful, especially in a genre that can often lean on cruelty as a crutch. They could have easily made you work for an ending where she lives, but I can't see it as anything but an artistic statement that Rei is meant to survive her grief. When the person you love most dies, life can feel like it's lost all meaning. You can feel like it'd be better to join them because life without them isn't worth the effort. So, for Fatal Frame 3 to present a character who feels directly responsible for the death of her fiancé, someone who actively wants to die because she can't live with her guilt, and to have that fiancé meet with her, absorb her tattoos, the physical manifestation of all of her pain and grief, and then tell her to live on, when genre conventions would say otherwise, all for the sake of cheap drama? Words don't do this justice. Calling it powerful or beautiful doesn't feel like that's enough. Horror is obsessed with suffering, and I get it. It can make for a compelling story, but it takes a special kind of horror story to acknowledge that one can face their trauma and grow, that they can heal from it. After I finished, I imagined someone who had maybe lost their spouse recently, reaching the credits and being faced with this message that their life has value, that they're allowed to let themselves keep going, to live to the fullest.
I never understood why we survived. But now, I realize why we were allowed to live.
I'll go on living, even with the pain.
I hope they are able to cherish this ending as much as I was able to. So, to cap this off, to my family, my loved ones, and that friend, for now and always, I'll go on living, even with the pain. Take care, and thank you for everything.
Welcome to my tiny little Patreon corner. There was a version of this that definitely had me outside, but that was awkward and I decided to just re-record the whole thing. First off, I'd like to thank everyone who helped me make this video possible. Hot Cider for the thumbnail, Supreme Zerker for helping me edit the script, Eurothug 4000 for doing some voice cameo stuff. Oh yeah, and while I'm at it, shout out Pixel Lit Kevin for helping me lav mic. Appreciate that. If you aren't aware, at the end of all of these videos, I also shout out the patrons who help support all of this. My Blue Vibe Cave. If you'd like to have your name scroll by in whatever direction it currently is scrolling, ask a question that could end up at the end of one of these videos, get a vocal shout out, or even see videos 3 days early, check out the link in the description below. This month's Metal Royal Slimes are Enoravan, Happy Emmons, Hornkerling, I Frozen Ace, Jeremy DeForest, Moonwatcher, Renteka Bond, Snigs, and your friend Chuck. And now, another entry in the new Patreon questions bit we're doing. Legotron asked, if you had a persona, what would it be? Kind of walking on landmines here no matter how I answer. A lot of my friends kind of kin me as a dog boy because I get so excitable. Personally, I don't see it, but I can't think of anything else. Kazuma from Podcast even got me commissioned dog boy art. So, thanks. Sonia asked, have you ever considered doing videos on topics other than video games? For example, have you ever thought of doing a video on like Gundam 00 or Char's Counterattack? Yes, I have. There's a problem though I get where I really want to talk about a piece of media, whether it be like games, movies, manga, whatever, where I want to do it, I get excited about doing it, and then I might tell people I'm going to do it, and then I realize that I have less to say than I anticipated, or I just don't know how to work with that particular medium in regards to making this kind of content. But there was actually one anime video I wanted to make this year, and that would be the woman named, hold on, is she named or is she called? She is called, she is not named. The woman called Fujiko Mine. That show rules. I love that show so much. Once again, thank you to all the patrons that support me every single month. I genuinely appreciate everyone's patience while I work on this video. It was very personal and I wasn't getting emotional just then. I had to burp, I'm sorry. But yeah, I genuinely appreciate everyone who made it to the end and watched me talk about this neat little PS2 game. I'm gonna stop rambling now and get back to it. You know, I really don't get why people say they don't like boost gameplay. I think it's pretty sick.